Up next, we're going to talk about the ZoZo phenomenon. Oh, yeah, the ZoZo phenomenon next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Let me introduce you to a couple guests. Darren Evans is a paranormal survivor and investigator. He has been featured as himself in the film and television appearances related to ZoZo. His ZoZo websites have attracted worldwide attention, and he has become known as the ZoZoologist. Darren Evans back on Coast to Coast. Hey, Darren, good to have you back.
Hey, man, it's good to be here. Thanks.
Looking forward to this. And, of course, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, our leading expert in the paranormal. She has written a number of books, including Talking to the Dead with Me and also the ZoZo phenomenon here with Darren. She has investigated angels, the jinn, Ouija boards, and that's what we're going to talk about as well. Hello, Rosemary. Good to have you back.
Good evening, George. I'm delighted to be back.
I would like you, Rosemary, to very quickly tell us, what is ZoZo?
ZoZo is a negative entity who seems to prefer to pester people who use spirit boards in an attempt to communicate with the spirit world. And this entity will create nasty effects in a household environment, poltergeist effects. It will taunt people, even attach to them, and create varying degrees of possession in the worst-case scenarios. This has been well documented now for some time, and one of the things that Darren and I have revealed in the ZoZo phenomenon is that ZoZo has quite a history and goes way, way back. That seems to be a negative entity with a very long history.
Now, Darren, how did you discover ZoZo?
In 1982, when I was a teenager, there was a very strange double-sided Ouija board found underneath my girlfriend's house in West Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that's when my involvement with it was a very strange board, very heavy, very large. On one side was a standard William Fold board that we traced to the 1930s. But it was the other side that was just a sight to behold. It had weird inscriptions. It had weird symbols, and it had ZoZo, etched at the top of the board where the regular Ouija would go. And so, this board was found underneath the house, surrounded by jars of preserved blackbirds, which we thought at the time was very strange. And I really didn't know anything about the paranormal or whatever. And so we started having sessions with this thing, despite her parents telling us not to. And, the house, we already thought the house was haunted because of the experiences people were having there. And so that's, as far as my involvement, it was the discovery of this board, which led to sessions, which led to an obsession of me actually playing the board just all over the place. I kind of became the guy that if you didn't believe in the spirit realm, people would call me over to your house, and we would have a Ouija session.
What is ZoZo, if you can say, Darren, what does it look like?
As far as reports, the only actual things that I actually seen was a black, smoky haze, fog type of site. However, throughout the years, people have described it as various descriptions, including a reptoid, lizard-looking creature, as well as there's been a few people that said it looked like a dog. But there's various descriptions, which kind of leads us to believe it may be a shapeshifter. But it's very strange in the different descriptions.
This incredible phenomenon that is out there, is it, or was it once a live entity? Was it a human being at some point? We really don't know. Rosemary and I, really delved into some research and attempted to find, historical proof, of which we did. We revealed that in the book, and it seems, we had a professor of etymology do some research on the root word zo, and it seems to have come from early voodoo, ancient Africa, as far as meaning a spiritual leader. So some people do believe that it's a possibility that this thing could have been worshipped as a deity or something like that in the past. Darren, where did the name ZoZo come from? the first time I ever saw it was on that double-sided board. For a long time I thought that all boards were double-sided. But as far as where does the name come from, there's various, the term ZoZo in the ancient Basque language actually means blackbird or crow. I didn't find that out till years later, but I do find that a strange connection, with crows and ravens being on the surface of a lot of talking boards, and the whole prophetic ravenology, omens that are associated with it. And so as far as where does the name come from, there's various definitions in different languages. In Haitian, there's a lot of different strange, definitions of the word. And so we take a good broad look at that in the book.
And backwards, it's Oz. I'm not so sure that it was the land of the Oz. Do people get hurt, Darren, with ZoZo?
Yes. I've throughout the years, I've received hundreds of emails from people all over the world who have sent me in their stories, and I've tried to help these people as much as I can as far as understanding the phenomenon, what they may be dealing with, ways to rid it from one's life. And so it's definitely, it jumps cultural and geographic boundaries, which is just one more disturbing aspect of the phenomenon.
Jeez, what an amazing phenomenon. Now, Rosemary will take us through some of these weaves and webs as we get to ZoZo. And welcome back. I want to thank Darren Evans for telling us a little bit about the ZoZo phenomenon. He's quite a person to be able to discover this, Rosemary.
Well, very brave, in fact. I first heard about ZoZo some years ago, just during the course of my usual sleuthing around in the paranormal, and I was researching a lot of Ouija board communications, and I heard about Darren and called him up and talked with him, and found out his story about how he had started using this weird ZoZo board and become increasingly obsessed with using it, and that the Ouija board would perform in unusual ways, and this entity began to take more and more of a personality and presence, to the point where he really suffered a nervous breakdown. And that led Darren to set up a search around the world to see if other people had the same sort of experience. He kind of, didn't want to believe that he was all alone. And much to his astonishment, he discovered that people all over the world had, independent of each other and without knowing anything about ZoZo, had experiences very similar to his. And so over the years, then, he established patterns of behavior, characteristics, even a marked progression, very predictable progression of how this entity would behave, and usually on spirit boards, although I have encountered ZoZo with ghost box devices, and other people have encountered ZoZo with automatic writing, and even sitting in seances. In researching this term, and this is a self-named entity. The entity always names itself ZoZo. It has some variations like Zaza, Zo, even just the plain letter Z. Some strange ones like Mama and Lily even, seems to be multi-personalitied. But the odd thing is that the terms Zo and ZoZo have dark associations, no matter where you look, in different languages at different periods in history. It's associated with a real trickster kind of energy and personality, and this really plays out on the board. That people get yanked around and even psychologically harmed. There have been reports of entity sexual assaults, poltergeist effects, the manifestations of shadow people, and as Darren described, kind of fog and mist in a room. Sometimes people are just out for a lark, to have fun with the spirit board, start communicating with something that identifies itself as ZoZo, and at first they're amused, and then they become kind of entranced, and then this entity really starts taking over.
What does it really want, Rosemary? What does it want?
It seems to want to pester people and torment them more than anything. And I think it takes advantage of people in whatever way it can. It can create violent dreams and nightmares, give people the feeling that they're being watched. The more somebody is upset and begins to deteriorate and disintegrate, the more active and strong this entity seems to become. And in certain cases where it seems to be able to have a sexual advantage, it does that too. It's easy to call it a demon, and that's what people usually think it is, that it's demonic in nature.
But it's not.
It may very well be, because we did find historical reference to ZoZo as a demon in Colin de Plancy's dictionary published in 1818 in a sermon from a saint, Saint Bernardino, from the 14th century, 14th and early 15th century, referencing a mass of ZoZo as common to all demons. So it's got demonic-like traits, but it also has jinn-like traits. It might even be part thought form, because as people experience it, they contribute some fear and anxiety to the situation that then could be played back in kind of a thought form or projection of an archetype. It could be, you'd asked about ancient gods earlier. It could be an ancient god that has kind of fallen into the ranks of demons, but it's got this heavy trickster element to it. And sometimes when people get very deeply entrenched in these ZoZo experiences, they have a very hard time getting out of it, and even exorcisms may have to be performed.
This is scary stuff, Rosemary.
Well, it certainly is, and I think plenty of people have gotten themselves into trouble. But at the same time, and you know my position on the Ouija board and spirit board.
Oh yeah, you were the only one who wanted me to go through with it.
We can't blame the boards necessarily.
Try it, George. Nothing'll happen. You'll like it.
It's the board itself, it's neutral. I mean, ZoZo has come across these other tools. I've had ZoZo speak to me on a ghost box with a voice, and I've had ZoZo show up in Ouija board experiments, and it is a danger element to anything involving spirit communications. There is that danger that you might encounter something very negative and formidable, but we can't blame the tools. And, of course, many of the people who wind up in hot water are a bit naive about the boards, or they're out for a lark. They're at parties where people are having recreational substances, and they ask the wrong questions. They almost want to be scared. It's part of the excitement of it, so they're kind of looking for a thrill. And there are things out there that are very happy to oblige, and this entity seems to be one of them.
Now, how do we know, like the Slender Man phenomenon, that ZoZo's tied into some kind of mass hysteria?
It's possible, and we do have to consider that angle, because, we're never completely separate from the phenomena. We participate in it even when we think we're just merely observing it, and we contribute an energy to it. And, people have commented that, well, where was ZoZo before, like, the 1980s, or even before the Ouija board came into its present incarnation in the late 19th century? How do we know that we haven't really created this thing ourselves, and that we're having experiences that fulfill our fears and expectations? There is that element, and I think that does account for a certain part of experiences, or even percentage of experiences, that the more people know about ZoZo, especially young people, there's a background sort of fear and excitement about maybe we'll talk to ZoZo tonight, and then that
little do they know.
Out.
Jeez.
But it doesn't account for all of the experiences, because plenty of people are just flat out blindsided.
How far back does ZoZo go? You were talking about some earlier depictions, but does it go way back, almost to the beginning of mankind?
It's quite possible, and in conversations that I've had with my friend John Zaffis, who also has looked into the ZoZo phenomenon, and he wrote the foreword for a book.
And as a matter of fact, let me read part of his line here for you. It says, everyone interested in the dark side of the spirit world should read this book. Darren and Rosemary open up new territory in demonology. That's what John said.
Well, and he's exactly right, because ZoZo really hasn't been on the map as a demon, and John has speculated that ZoZo might be some corrupted ancient deity, and that's exactly what happened to a lot of old deities, is that as they got subsumed by conquering religions of whatever stripe, they became demonized. They fell into the ranks of tainted entities. And let's just speculate, if you were worshipped as a deity and suddenly you're reviled as a dark entity, well, that might make you a bit upset, and you might act out in rather negative ways, or in ways that play upon people's fears. And so it seemed that no matter where you look, you can find some sort of connection to the term Zo or ZoZo as an unpredictable trickster kind of entity with dark associations, gloom, fear, anxiety, dark use of power, manipulation, sexual predation. And there's even kind of a humorous side to it, too, that the term ZoZo can refer in some languages to twit or idiot or something rather silly. And so we've literally demonized the term Zo and ZoZo. There's even an alien connection. And in the early 1950s, George Hunt Williamson, who was a follower of Adamski, he and his wife got interested in the Ouija board, and with another couple they were friends with, they started using the Ouija board, attempting to communicate with aliens, with ETs. And they started communicating with a group of entities, several of them, who started giving dire warnings about disasters on the planet. The leader of this group was named Zo. And Zo said that he was a leader of a band of aliens on Mars, and he was originally from Neptune, and gave all of these warnings that Earth was going to be invaded, and humans had better wake up. So, and we found some other connections with aliens as well. So, ZoZo, whatever ZoZo is, I think ZoZo is a trickster personality or entity that shapeshifts, morphs, absorbs human fear and anxiety, that those things that are projected onto it, and plays upon those anxieties, shapeshifts into different personalities, uses different names, and I think it entertains itself.
I think so, too. Now, do you have to get through to ZoZo through a ZoZo-type board, or can he also come through a normal Ouija board?
Most people have had their experiences using just a regular board, something they've purchased at the store. A lot of homemade boards. We have many descriptions of that, where people don't have a board, but they get out a piece of paper, a piece of cardboard, and make one by hand, use whatever's handy, a glass or a small object of service, the planchette. So that seems to be the most common form of contact with this entity, and it may have to do with the fact that spirit boards are just widely available, far more than other tools. Very few people have ghost boxes per se, as opposed to boards. But it can come through on other devices. People have encountered ZoZo in automatic writing, and we have some cases where people have just been sitting kind of as observers in seance situations where board isn't even used, and ZoZo will manifest.
Does anything good happen with ZoZo, Rosemary?
Not yet.
Well.
We don't have... ZoZo will start out benign, and this is a pattern that in the paranormal we see in other cases of spirit attachment, where at first the entity is joking and funny and nice.
Kind of pulls you in, right?
Pulls you in, and then gets increasingly mocking and derisive, manipulative, and then things just go off the deep end, and people feel plunged into a horror when everything is out of control and things are happening in the environment, and they feel internally as well.
Now, in terms of ZoZo's response with other people as it tricks them and then, pulls them in more and more, in your opinion, what has been the most serious thing that has happened with using ZoZo?
We've had people report serious physical injuries, psychotic episodes, breakdowns, sexual attacks that rival the film The Entity, that are of the nature of incubus and succubus kinds of just out-and-out rape, where people feel their clothing being pulled off, and physical kinds of sensations that go along with that. The psychological terror seems to be, I would say, the greatest hazard of that, where people suffer a mental deterioration, and they can't sleep, they can't concentrate, they feel watched. Things start going bad in their lives. But there are also accidents, and for example, ZoZo will make a communication that in a prediction that there's going to be an accident, and sure enough, someone is in that kind of accident that ZoZo has described. And Darren has had a couple of accounts in his own personal dealings with this entity where messages predicted deaths of friends of his that came to pass.
Is there any magic involved with ZoZo?
We have found a connection to magic, and that's through the works of Aleister Crowley. There are some very bizarre connections there, and also, strangely, through Led Zeppelin. And many people are familiar with the ZoZo symbol that appeared on the band's fourth album. It was an untitled album that came out in 1971, and all the band members kind of signed the album with an occult symbol. And Page's symbol was very strange, and it's similar to the ZoZo symbol that we have on the cover of our book. But many people who are aficionados of Led Zeppelin are very familiar with this stylized ZoZo, Z-O-S-O. And Page would never, who was interested in Crowley and even bought his house in Scotland and owned it for a while, he never explained exactly what this symbol was or what it meant. And so that, of course, sent many people scurrying off to try and interpret what message was he trying to send. And finally it was unearthed that this ZoZo symbol seemed to be stylized upon an old sigil for Saturn that dates back to the 12th century and was used in a magical text that was published in the mid-1500s by an Italian occultist named Cardano. And so was he attempting to use some sort of magic in using this on the album? Page did make references to the merger of magic and music, and that this was very alchemical. Aleister Crowley, who I believe was in contact with jinn, and I do talk about that in the jinn connection, how I think a number of the powerful entities that he conjured up were actually jinn. In one of his incantations to conjure up Corazon, uses one of the alternate names of ZoZo, Zaza, and Zaza
pretty close.
Was in the incarnation. He even named gave his daughter I think a middle name of Zaza.
That's
it was
nice.
Lola Zaza.
Have you tried to contact ZoZo?
I haven't deliberately tried to contact ZoZo, but ZoZo has shown up from time to time when I've been out doing paranormal investigations. And there's always a marked shift when this entity makes an entrance. And I mentioned that I have encountered it on a ghost box, a Frank's box, and also on the Ouija board. One of the patterns that Darren discovered, very characteristic of this entity when it makes announces itself on the Ouija board, is that the planchette will start to do figure eights around the board, or just kind of go back and forth very rapidly between the Z and the O, and he calls it the rainbow effect. And so when that starts to happen, now that I know what that pattern is, it's the intrusion of this entity into a communication session. And if anything productive has been going on, it kind of goes out the window because this presence pushes everything else out. And it's never has anything constructive to say. It's often foul-mouthed, and I usually just end the session and get it out.
Yeah, it's pretty evil. Rosemary, we're going to come back with phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. We're going to take your calls here with Rosemary Ellen Guiley this hour. Rosemary, is ZoZo dangerous?
I do believe ZoZo is, because of its unpredictable, even abusive and violent behavior toward people. And depending upon the person, how able they are to resist that sort of thing, they can be deeply affected by it. Is someone likely to encounter ZoZo on a spirit board? More often than not, probably no. Plenty of people have benign experiences, never encounter ZoZo. But over the years that at least Darren has been tracking ZoZo now since the late 1980s, its presence seems to be increasing, and some of that may be due to publicity. More people know about it. There might be an expectation or even a hope that it might show up. But yes, this is a very negative, potentially dangerous entity, and there are other entities like this in the spirit world who are capable of creating a great deal of havoc for people.
With ZoZo, is anybody else researching this creature? Just you?
Well, Darren certainly started as the first. He set up a blog and started asking if any people had encountered this kind of entity, and that did stimulate an interest in other people as well. Some people have written ZoZo off as just kind of a temporary phenomenon, or sort of artificially created by the mass hysteria factor and expectation. But those explanations really don't account for all of the occurrences of it. Another explanation that's frequently given is that it's an ideometer kind of effect, that people are subconsciously pushing around the planchette to deliver messages that they would like to get, or even might secretly fear to get. And here again, it's very difficult to completely rule out some of these explanations, and I think in many cases there's kind of a blurriness of things that go on, kind of an overlap. But it is it's part of the dark side of spirit communications, and because boards are so readily available and many people play with them and experiment with them, I think that's one of the reasons why this entity has used this particular avenue in its attempts to pester people.
Okay, let's go to the phones now. We go to Fort Myers, Florida. Elaine is with us to get things started. Hi, Elaine.
Hi. I've never forgotten about this. I'm 66 years old, and back in 1969, when I was 19 years old and my sister was 15 years old, we had a Ouija board back then, and we played with it and everything, and I just decided to ask this question of, when am I going to die? And the thing just whizzed around. I said, "Are you moving this?" And she said, "No, I'm not moving." It just whizzed around and put all these letters and stuff in it. I don't even know if we even kept up with all the letters. But what it finally said was, that I was going to die when I was 21. And I was 19. So I said, okay, well, I've got 2 years to live. But My sister died 2 years later when she was 17.
Oh.
And
they had the right family, wrong person.
No, I will never play with the Ouija board again. I don't know if we let something bad in there when we were just kids or whatever, but she did die 2 years later, but not me.
Rosemary, the Ouija board doesn't do anything to you, does it? It just tells you things to be?
It's simply a tool. It's a communication tool, an interface. You potentially could get the same information through dowsing rods or automatic writing, a pendulum,
or a psychic.
Or a psychic. And people will often blame the board, and people have called it, that it's a demon board, and that it's guaranteed to open up the door to something negative, and that's simply not true. You can have a negative experience using just about anything, and here again, I think it has to do with the prevalence of the board. But once people have a negative experience that affects them deeply, no matter what they've used, they're going to avoid it and consider it to be a bad experience. One of the mistakes that people make is asking about death. When am I going to die, or when is so-and-so going to die? And there are so many instances of uncanny accurate predictions for the manner of death and even the age or the date of death. Then there are ones that just totally miss the mark, but then something, as Elaine pointed out, something else bad happens that you still associate with the communication. And one of the things that trickster entities like ZoZo do is they, in the beginning, when they're hooking people, they do provide a lot of accurate information, and that's what gets people more entranced with communicating with the entity.
Next up, we go to Ron in Oklahoma City. Ron, thank you for calling. You're on with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Go ahead,
Ron.
Well,
I'm a first-time caller.
Okay, great.
Actually, I'm a first-time listener. And I was trucking down the highway, and I was trying to figure out what in the world are you people talking about.
What a night for you to call.
Well, so I'm trying to think, why in the world would anybody want to be messing around with that stuff? Why would anybody want to contact an evil entity? I mean, and I'm a Christian. I believe in the Bible, and I read the Bible, and I've tried to get in even deeper into other writings of Christ and other writings and trying to keep an open mind. But my question is why in the world would anybody want to mess with the dark forces of
great
spirit world
question
to begin with? You're a physical being. You got enough problems on your plate as far as living in this world to begin with. Why would anybody want to mess with that kind of stuff? I mean, I took my grandson on a ghost tour in San Antonio one time. And, and my grandson was like, what do we might see? And I said, I don't know. And even if you do contact or see a ghost, what can you do with that kind of information?
But you started to do it for fun, right?
Well, sure, but what can you do with that information? I mean, that's a total different realm. I mean, even if you knew that, people see all these UFOs and stuff. What can you do with that information if they don't ever come and land down here and talk to you? What good is that kind of information? I mean, it's curiosity and it's this and it's that, but if you can't contact them and if they're not going to land down here and talk to you, what good is it that that you know that they exist and that you've seen them? And what good is that information? Because you can't build on it, you can't do anything with it. You know what I mean?
All right, let's get Rosemary's comments.
A totally different realm.
All right, thanks, Ron. Appreciate you being a first-time caller, too, and listening to the show. But that's a good question, Rosemary. Why play around with stuff like this?
Well, most people do not set out to contact evil entities right off the bat. I mean, yes, there are people who do court the dark side, and for various reasons. And they may use a variety of methods to do that. But most people who set out on spirit communications experiments are not attempting to contact something that's negative. They're trying to see what's out there. And so as I mentioned earlier, many of them just wind up being blindsided by something that starts out benign or neutral or even friendly, and then really turns on them and reveals itself as a malevolent force. There are opportunistic entities, and that is one of the hazards of opening up the door to the spirit world. So some people are experimenting. Some people are sincerely trying to contact people who have gone on to the other side, or they're just curious about what's out there. And they wind up getting a lot more than they bargained for.
They sure do. And those who think it's just merely fun, does it backfire on them too?
Well, it can. We certainly have had episodes that we report in the book where things have backfired on people. A lot of times, nothing's going to happen. And when years ago, when we were going to do that Ouija board experiment on the air on Coast, one of my biggest concerns was nothing happening, that the board would be fairly inactive. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the biggest hazard of spirit communications, is that very little to nothing happens. But then you have these events where they just sort of explode on you. And so people do need to be aware of the hazards and to take precautions and to recognize the warning signs. And in the case of ZoZo, ZoZo has a telltale trail in terms of how it starts and where it leads. But in answer to one of Ron's other questions about what good is any of this, if the physical proof isn't there, UFOs don't land on the White House lawn, and I think it's very purposeful to make contact with otherworldly beings and intelligences. And they're paraphysical. They're not really physical most of the time in our world anyway. They're coming from other vibrational realms, and so they're not going to leave a lot of physical evidence behind. But I think it's part of our discovery of who we are as human beings and where we fit into the great scheme of things in the cosmos, to know what else is out there and how it is interacting with us in ways that we may not even be aware of.
We have first-time caller Noelle in North Carolina. Hello, Noelle. Thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you so much, both of you, for everything that you do. I love the show, and I like both of what your work and everything.
Thank you.
I was calling to see what Rosemary had to say about a possible connection between ZoZo and shadow people. When I was 2 years old, that was my first memory, is a shadow person coming through my room, and obviously I hadn't used a Ouija board at that time, and I continue to see them throughout my life until probably about 6 years ago.
Well, there is an overlap between the two, and what happens in a lot of these contact experiences and even manifestations of phenomena is that there's a lot of shape-shifting that goes on. There's a lot of blurriness of boundaries in terms of where one thing ends and another thing starts. One of the things that does happen in progressive deteriorations with ZoZo is people will start seeing dark forms in their room, like shadow people, and bedroom visitations by dark forms. In the book, I talk about whether or not ZoZo is a jinn, which has been one of my areas of specialty for the past few years. And ZoZo does have its behavior has a lot of characteristics of the jinn, and there's a big blurry overlap between demonic behavior and jinn behavior. Very difficult to separate the two sometimes. But one of the favorite forms that I have concluded happens with jinn is the shadow person, and that the jinn will take shadow person forms when they're attaching to people and pestering people. And so we have these similarities of traits between the ZoZo personality and shadow people and jinn. It's some interesting links there.
You've talked about Z entities. Exactly what are they? Are they just all tied into ZoZo?
They are, George, and this is a term that Darren coined in the course of his research, that ZoZo seems to have these alter egos, and yet it all boils down to the same basic personality. And it usually announces itself by ZoZo or Zo, or sometimes just the letter Z. Then there's Za and Zaza, and various other Z names. And we've even speculated on, is almost any Z name a potential alter ego of ZoZo. And then there are two others that seem to be very pernicious, and one of those alter egos is Mama. And some people have worse experiences with Mama than ZoZo. And ZoZo and Mama will get on the board and fight with each other.
Really?
We've had cases like that where they seem to try and push each other off the board.
Who wins?
My money goes down on Mama. And then there's Lily. And so we've speculated, and we've interviewed people who've also had the same speculations that Lily might be an abbreviation of Lilith. Drawn some connections between ZoZo and Lilith.
That's biblical. Let's go to Braden in Huntington Beach, California on the wild card line. Good morning, Braden. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Brother George. How are you doing, man?
Good, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, and Rosemary, it's a blessing to be listening to you tonight. My grandmother's name was Rosemary. She was very dear to me.
Well, wonderful. There's not too many of us Rosemarys around. It's a common name.
It's those eras have changed, haven't they? But go ahead, Braden.
Yes, they have. Well, George, I was calling to share an experience that I've had with you this past year. Has been a completely life-changing, mind-blowing experience for me. I actually they told me that they were going to come to me the day before on November 4th. And all summer I had been receiving signs, and like through synchronicity, all these different synchronistic occurrences were happening to me, and I was putting them together, and I felt that I was being contacted by something of a higher realm. And I still had trouble accepting it at the beginning. It kind of was like almost too real to believe. But then on November 5th, man, an angel came to me last year and revealed some things to me through videos and through synchronistic events that were going on in my life. And basically, and then they contacted me again about 2 weeks later, and I've been contacted again a few times. And actually, it's funny how they initially started revealing themselves to me. It was through like an alien connection. And at first, after the initial contact on the 5th of November, I thought it had just something to do with aliens. And 2 days later, on the 7th, I was walking down PCH, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, man, I'm about to be abducted by aliens or something with aliens. And as I'm thinking this, I look up in the sky above the Pacific Ocean, and it's that night that craft flew into our universe. You can see, or into our atmosphere. At first, it looked like a star, and it came down, and then it passed from left to right, released this like blue light energy show, and then went left back out into the universe. And it was right above me as I was thinking about them. It's almost like they were flying by to let me know that I wasn't tripping, and it was like the physical evidence to let me know it wasn't all in my mind. And so these events started occurring, and it was just really mind-blowing to me, and I started putting it together that it was more than just aliens. It was like angels, right? And then I found this 16th century painting from Kosovo of the crucifixion of Christ, where above him there's two crafts on each side flying from left to right, and inside them you see a man in each one reaching for controls, like they're flying a craft, like they're angels flying a craft.
That's right.
And it's exactly the same as the craft that I saw. And the angel revealed to me that those are the same angels that have come to me. Like in the Bible I read recently, it says that in the final days, the Lord will send forth his angels to gather his congregation. Now, no man will know the hour or the day of the rapture or the return, but because he will send forth his angels to gather his congregation so they may be spiritually prepared.
Let me ask Rosemary a question for a second here, in Braden and Rosemary. Rosemary, you've done a lot of work about angels.
Yes, I have.
Do they ever get involved with Ouija boards, or do they ever cross over to communicate that way? I've never heard that.
It's very uncommon. Angels will usually communicate with people in other ways, usually through meditation or dreams or a visitation kind of experience.
That truly is remarkable. Now, the ZoZo Phenomenon book is already out, right?
Yes, it is, and it's available online on Amazon. It's up in ebook format on Kindle, Nook, and Kobo.
Okay, stay with us. We're going to come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM and take final phone calls with Rosemary Ellen Guiley as we talk about the ZoZo Phenomenon, and then later on tonight, open lines. Okay, so the rest of this hour, we will take your phone calls with Rosemary Ellen Guiley as we talk about the ZoZo Phenomenon. I'm glad I never played around with that board or to try to summon up that thing. So we'll come back in a moment right here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Rosemary Ellen Guiley with us. Rosemary, amazing story, though, the ZoZo phenomenon. Have you known about it for a long time?
I have for some years. When I started doing a lot of investigations in the paranormal, I started encountering this entity myself, and it made me curious because other people said, "Oh yeah, ZoZo. ZoZo is something that shows up." And then meeting Darren and learning about his story and his research, it really made me want to dig deeper to try and uncover a mystery. And like anything in the paranormal, the deeper you dig, the more you find, and the deeper the mystery gets. And even though you get a perspective on the mystery, sometimes the final answers are still elusive. And I think we can conclude that ZoZo is a negative personality that's capable of shape-shifting, taking various identities, of morphing itself to the expectations of human beings in order to take advantage of them, and that this is part of a pattern of dark side entities in general. I speculate that this entity that calls itself ZoZo has probably pestered people throughout human history, just using whatever accessible forms and methods fit the times. And today we have a device, the spirit board, the Ouija board, that's available to millions of people. So I think it's found its preferred choice of method.
What's your recommendation today to people who want to use the Ouija board?
They should take some precautions about how they use the Ouija board. It should not be used when your energy is down, you're feeling poorly or depressed or tired or fatigued. It should not be used in party thrill-seeking situations, especially if participants have been using recreational substances. And it's a good idea not to work a board alone. Many people do, and some people very successfully, and have very positive experiences. But in cases where people fall victim to a predatory kind of entity, they often start using it by themselves because they become so obsessed with the communication that other people don't want to do it as often as they do, and that's kind of a danger sign.
Okay, let's go back to the calls. Let's go to James in Las Vegas, Nevada, west of the Rockies. Of course. Hello, James. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm really humbled to be on your show.
Oh, thank you. Glad you called.
I have a personal experience of the ZoZo phenomena.
What happened?
I was just a teenager. Well, I was 16 years old. I still lived here in Nevada in Las Vegas. And my parents were out of town, and I had the whole house to myself. And, I was 16.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I was curious about the occult, stuff like that. I thought it was really interesting, and I played with a Ouija board. I bought it at a pawn shop when we were on vacation.
Did you?
Really
now, were
cool.
you by yourself, or did you have friends come over?
I was completely by myself.
By yourself, okay.
This was late at night. I was completely alone. I played with the Ouija board, and it was slow going, and I was messing with it for half an hour maybe, and then I try again, and the piece made a figure eight kind of pattern. And it went all left and right, askew on the board. And I saw it was an OZ, OZ, OZ. And it did that for just a minute. And at that point, I was completely mortified. I didn't know what to think. So I go to sleep. Now, this seems pretty normal.
Sure.
I have a dream, and it's a peculiar dream. I'm in a kitchen, an Italian kitchen. Now, it sounds like it's going to get off track, but it'll tie in, and I promise you, it's very strange. In an Italian kitchen in this dream, I see a large, black, brolic man in a chef's outfit. He looks, he's a pretty big dude. He turns around, and in bedazzled letters on the back of his white uniform, his chef uniform, it says Big ZoZo. and we're cooking spaghetti, right? And he says, "Get the spicy meatballs, put it in the spaghetti." I'm like, "Okay." I dropped the bag of meatballs. This is in my dream, of course.
Yeah.
I dropped the bag of meatballs, and he says, "Now you're going to get Big ZoZo." And he assaulted me, like he assaulted me sexually. I mean, no, I'm not. I'm gonna keep this PG. But he bent me over and he.
Well, that's it for you. So sorry about that, kid. ZoZo has a habit, I guess, Rosemary.
Well, we've collected a lot of stories where people have had abusive sexual encounters with an invisible presence that's manifested after ZoZo has been communicating, or it does come in some like a lucid dream or quasi, an alternate reality kind of experience. The planchette moving in the figure 8 is very characteristic of the opening salvo of this entity. And I mentioned earlier that it if other communicators have been present, it pushes them out. It's a very strong presence. And I found that once this entity shows up in a communication session, the only thing to do is shut it down. And this is where people make a big mistake, that quite often they will let this entity run, and they're curious to see where it's all going to go. They might even be excited or thrilled, but the more you let this entity have a presence, then the stronger it gets, and the more attached it is to your environment and possibly to you, the user. And so in the cases where ZoZo has shown up in some of my spirit communication sessions, I shut it down. It's telling it to go away just doesn't seem to work, and you just have to end the session and shut the door very firmly.
Now, and sometimes, this graphic description of what happens to you, is that far-fetched?
Years and years ago, I thought a lot of these things were far-fetched, but the evidence just piles up over and over again from independent sources, people who have had no knowledge of the occult or negative presences, or have ever heard of ZoZo or other hostile presences, and they report the same thing. And so I think that these things do happen to people, and that this is part of the dark side of the paranormal. Now, as I've said earlier, the average person is probably not going to have a negative experience, may never have a negative experience, no matter what they use for spirit communications. But this shadow side, this dark side, this dangerous side, it exists, and people need to know about it so that they can be prepared in case the warning signs show up.
Let's go to Indiana. Hi, Robin. You are up with us. Go ahead.
Hi. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning to you.
I wanted to mention an experience I had with dowsing rods. I got them originally to communicate with someone that had passed and thought I was, and then something kind of crept into my mind that, these dowsing rods are going crazy, and I was asking, I wasn't communicating with the person anymore, and that I wanted to, and I thought, well, I'll ask a question of it just to kind of test, and I said, I asked, should I play the lottery? Should I play it every day? And it said yes, and I thought, okay, I don't know who I've got here, but that's crazy. And then another thing happened where I was leaving my apartment, and I decided to put the dowsing rods down. Okay, but I was leaving and I was looking back into my apartment, and I had the weirdest sensation of like a mass, a dark shadowy mass, rushing towards me, but it was weird because I was like that mass and I was rushing myself. And I thought, okay, this is, I associated it with like the dowsing rods, like I had opened something. But when you were mentioning mischievous and dark, it made me kind of wonder if, if it wasn't the ZoZo or maybe a minion or whatever, but so I guess my comment would be, and I'm just an average person, and I was innocent enough picking these dowsing rods up, but I'm with you. I don't think we should be messing with things we really don't, we're not experienced with.
Rosemary, the person who was so vehement when we were going to do that Ouija board experiment, Jordan Maxwell, just had a heart attack.
He did.
Yeah, I mean, he's alive, but sometimes I wonder if negative spirits try to attack people in different ways. What do you think?
Oh, many people who get involved in this kind of work, investigating the paranormal or research into spirit communications, entity contact experiences, do feel that they become targets. And I think that the dark side does not like to be examined. And people who pursue knowledge of the dark side or helping people overcome their difficulties and problems, pushing the dark side out, they become targets too. And so people who work in these fields will often have ongoing problems. And it's always hard to say, the specific things that happen could be directly related. But I think there's a lot of hazard in this end of things. I've certainly run into it with the jinn. The deeper I've gone into the jinn, the more they've kind of pushed back and pestered me in many ways. And for some people, especially those people who do exorcisms and really kind of violent sort of releasements where something is very powerful and very deeply entrenched, I think they're the most at risk.
Karen Dahlman, who loves the Ouija board, swears by it.
Well, Karen is part of a community of board users who have positive experiences, and we find many examples also in the literature of people who've had beneficial and benign uses. Every time I've gotten together with Karen, and I was just a guest in her house about a month or so ago, we've had fabulous board sessions, and both of us feel that a lot of it is just the way you're oriented, and if you and here's another thing too for preparing and protecting yourself, that if you have a spiritual practice where you have a spiritual foundation and a focal point, regardless of what it is, and you put energy into it through spiritual study, contemplation, meditation especially is very significant. It literally changes the vibration of your consciousness and your aura. And this puts you on a whole different level of access to the spirit world, and also in terms of what you're likely to attract and draw to you. A lot of the people who wind up having problems, they've got issues going on, they've got these background fears at play, anxieties, their lives might be in upheaval, and it does draw negative energy. I did find in researching shadow people, I spent over 10 years looking at shadow people, and a high number of cases involved people whose lives were in upheaval, and they were depressed, angry, sad, just going through great difficult times, and it seemed to draw these entities to them, and then when they got their lives sorted out, there was nothing left to attract these entities, and the experiences went away. But then other people have ongoing problems throughout their lives. These cases just get incredibly complicated with no easy no easy analyses of what's going on, and quite frequently no easy remedies either.
No, not at all. Let's go to Luis in Patterson, California now, first-time caller. Hey, Luis, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Good evening.
Hi.
And good evening to you too, Rosemary. I've been listening to your program. I've been listening to you guys for, I would say, about 7 or 8 years. And my question is, okay, we've been going through a lot for probably 10 years financially. And what I'm trying to say here, we have been told before to our family that somebody has put a curse. We noticed that every July is 2006, we go through financial problems.
It's strange timing.
Yes. Well, July every month, every year, ever since 2006. I'm not really sure since what day of July, but I've noticed that since July 2006. And then 2 years later, exactly 2 years, on July 5th, 2008, we were told later on, about 5 years later, that, because we've been seeing a shadow in our house. My sister has seen it. My another sister, younger sister, has seen it at a different house. Me and my sister, we've seen it in the same house. My twin sister has seen it in a different house, like 23 years ago, and we saw it 15 years apart. Me and my sister, we saw it the same year. My younger sister and me, we saw it the same year, 15 years apart from my twin sister. And the interesting part was that we saw it during the night. Me and my other sister, my younger sister, and my twin sister saw it during the day. Oh, no, I'm sorry. My younger sister saw it during the day, and my twin sister saw it during the day, and I saw it during the evening. But then I was told by another person, because we saw a program, I'm not going to go into that religious type of thing, but I just want to say, I was told later on there was a saint, what we saw.
A saint?
A saint, yes.
Well, you're probably pretty fortunate on that. Rosemary, how many people have positive experiences when they dabble with the other side? More or less than most people?
I would say that most people have neutral to positive experiences. So I definitely don't want to give the impression that if you open the door to the spirit world, you're likely to have a negative experience. That's not the case. But negative experiences do happen. People do get surprised. They don't expect something bad to happen. It does, and then they're unprepared for how to deal with it. But most of our contact experiences are positive, and for the past almost 2 years now, I've been very involved in the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial encounters.
Right.
We've been analyzing the results of the largest ever global survey of experiencers, and this is experiencers of all kinds, and the majority of people say that their contact experiences are positive and not negative. And the negative experiences are out there, and some of them are quite horrific, but most people say they have positive experiences. They're transforming. They feel that it's important for the development of consciousness and for humanity as a whole to have these experiences. And I think we do need to look more on the positive side. You know, the negative side, it does get a lot of press, and I think we have to be prepared for it. A lot of my work is devoted to helping people deal with the dark side.
Well, that's important. Rosemary, keep in touch with us, especially with those black mirrors that you've done some work with. Wow. Up next.